everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to see the faces that I can see. The first couple minutes of class are always going to be just say hello, and I'll be admitting people in the room. So it just takes a little bit to get things rolling. Thank you, Bishop, for saying good afternoon in the chat.
Ew.
So again, let me see. One of your classmates, it's saying joining, not letting she come in. Dana, are you? No, I don't see you yet. Oh yeah, okay, Dana, you're good. I was like, it was giving me a message on the admit thing. So I see you're here.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon, Jessica. Okay. All right, we'll just give it one more second and then we'll rock, we'll roll, we'll get into it. Just to let you know, this morning it's like there has been no heat in my apartment, so I have a little heater, and that's partly why I'm also wearing a sweater. I said, let me just dress warm to be indoors today, but you know that's what happens sometimes living in New York. I think something's up with the boiler. There's no heat or hot water, so so bear with me. Okay. All right, we'll just get started. There's one more person. This person in. Okay. Well, welcome to week 2 of class. Thanks those of you who were able to let me see your faces live in video. At least gives us the impression or the energy of being in class together. Great to see you. And I encourage any of you, if you come, if you can, do so. I'd love to see your faces. Okay. Peace. Thanks. Viviano, yeah, thank you, Viviano. All right, so I'm going to start today with the assignment. So thanks for, I think most of you, almost all of you, a good number of you got your assignments in. And the importance of getting the assignment, and everybody can hear me okay, I'm assuming, right? You can hear me fine, good. So the importance of getting the assignment in is because, you know, there's a method to the madness of our assignments, right? They're not just me making stuff up and saying, do this by this date, and, you know, trying to see who got it on time, who didn't. Because basically what we're doing is we're you know, you're going to be writing essays in this class. And so although you come into the room, right, you come to class having written essays. I know all of you did, you know, 110, 101, 100, some version of the first part of the composition class. And this is the second part. So whether you were here at Ostos or you were somewhere else, you're all grown. So whether you did it in high school or you did it in another place, but sometimes like writing essays is almost like anything in life. The more you do it, right, the better you get at it. The more you leave it alone for a while, even for like a month or two, then it takes a minute to get up to speed again, right? So it's almost like learning a language. You could, you know, like I took French, for example, I took French in college, right? And so I don't speak French in my life. I don't, you know, so I great. When I was taking the class, I was feeling like, I got this. And it was coming to me. The minute the class was over, like after that summer, when I came back and took the second part of the French class, it was almost like relearning it. So a lot of the assignments that we're doing are about what we call like scaffolding or building the blocks toward our essay. So this assignment that you did, it was basically, without saying write a body paragraph, you were writing a body paragraph, right? I was having you focus specifically on a poetic element, using a poem that we read together. And I'll just mute you all. It's easy to ask. Okay. So using a poem that we read together and giving you a specific poetic element that we had talked about, right? And so I asked you basically to do that, and I gave you an example, and you looked at the example of how a paragraph was done with a different poem, but you could see how it was constructed. And then I let you go. And so for the most part, it was really fantastic to see you all construct the sentence. And so what you were doing was exactly that. You're beginning to construct a body paragraph without us saying, do this, do that, looking at the elements of it. So overall, at this point, everybody who submitted it by last night got a feedback by today. I think I finished at around 11 o'clock. So, or 10 or 11 o'clock I finished. So I got everybody a response. So this is the beginning of our conversation on the page, right? So a lot of times when I give you a response, even if it's if I say excellent, sometimes I may say why it's excellent so that you and I are both clear why whatever it was excellent, right? If there are issues, we will talk about the issues as well. In this assignment, I was looking more for like construction of the sentence and the content of the sentence. I wasn't being too much of a stickler for the spelling. I did in some cases, I mentioned it, but the spelling, the grammar, I was looking at that. I didn't see any gigantic, issues that I needed to address at this moment. If I did, not gigantic, if I saw like several errors in it that I did something, and I think I may have only done that, you're not singled out with one student or two students, where I then will take their work, put it in a different file, make corrections, and I'm going to show you a little bit of how I do that when we go over the assignment. And how we're communicating I use Google Docs to do it. And so then I will send you a link to the Google Docs so you can look at the Google Doc, okay? So that's a little bit of my intro to what we're gonna do. So I just wanna say, take a look at the responses. If you have any questions, of course, you could always ask me after class, or you can ask me, right now. We'll have a moment that we're going over the assignment. But what I'm going to do is, without permission, but all of you, Blackboard makes things very democratic. So you can kind of see, once you post things on Blackboard, in the discussions, it's open to the entire class. And so it's interesting. I'm teaching the creative writing class, and they're writing very personal stories. So they have the option for that particular personal story to not put it on Blackboard because they might be writing about something they don't want everybody to know about. So with them in the Blackboard, they just wrote send by email, and I got theirs. But for our class, it's there. So I'm going to go over a couple of examples that you all posted. Now, if I use an example, it's not because I like that student better than other students. I didn't put their name on it. It's not because it's a terrible piece and or it's like the best piece in the world. But there are pieces that were very strong that are not a part of this group. But I feel like there was something in the examples I'm going to share that we can learn something from, right? So this next part that I'm going to go over, I'm just going to go over 3 of them with you, right? So if you think of the assignment, right, one of the things I will say too, that with body paragraphs, and when you're talking about something inside of a paragraph, that you stick to that one thing. One thing I experience sometimes is that students will begin talking about something and then start talking about something else, meaning in this case, begin talking about symbolism and then start talking about something else, right? So with body paragraphs, you have to stay close and consistent with whatever topic that paragraph is addressing. So it doesn't mean that other thing you talked about is not a good thing, or it's not right, or it's not a part of the poem, or it's not even profound. It could be great. But in terms of structure, it's moving away from the structure of that body paragraph. So in this case, we were discussing symbolism, right? So we're going to look at a couple of examples, and let me let Chris Bell in. The challenge with this thing is that once I get started, I don't see the waiting room. So sometimes, Chris Bell, I hope you weren't there too long. So I don't see the waiting room on. So I apologize if you wait a couple minutes sometimes, but that's an incentive to try to get to class within the first 3 or 4 minutes. So that way you're not left in the waiting room for like 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, so thinking about that. So this task was to look at symbolism, right? And I gave you the example, and most of you followed, right? You have to, in this case, it's a standalone paragraph, right? When you're doing just a standalone paragraph, you have to introduce what the poem is, who wrote it, right? Give us a little context, even though I read the poem and I've read it a million times, pretend like I didn't, right? Pretend like I don't know this poem, right? Pretend that you're not only writing to your professor, pretend you're writing to somebody who doesn't understand, who is not in class with you, so that way they can get the full context of it. And then I asked you to think of an example and to explain it, right? So those are the things that I'm looking for. To a friend, right? Or I'd say you can pretend you're writing to a friend, or if you have like a young person in your life, like a 10-year-old or somebody, just imagine you have to talk to them and explain it to them, right? And they're not in this class. So they may not even understand what symbolism is, right? So that's why very often you have to define what the poetic element is. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Hold on a second. Let me just go here a second. Yes. Screen. Okay. So let me make that a little bigger. Okay. So I'm right now in a Google Doc. Okay. And what Google Docs allows me to do is have a feature over here called suggesting, right? So I'm going to click suggesting. So if I was editing, it would just change whatever it was going to do. But suggesting lets you see what the changes are and make comments on over here on the right-hand side. So here's one example that someone submitted. In the poem, The Queen, written by Pablo Neruda, he describes his perfect woman through his beautiful poem. When the author said, "They are taller than you, taller, they are lovelier than you, lovelier, but you are the queen," Neruda refers that there are more beautiful women than her, but he loved her essence and personality. Neruda uses many symbols to describe his perfect woman. He mentions crystal crown and carpet of red gold. I think this description symbolizes the confidence and her personality when she walks on the street. Neruda describes his emotions when he sees her. And when you appear, all the rivers sound in my body and bells shake the sky, and a hymn fills the world. He symbolizes the rivers sound in my body, referring to the bristling of the skin. The shake the sky refers to the beat of his heart. Finally, Neruda mentions a hymn fills the world. The hymn symbolizes a song that gives peace. The woman gives him peace and love the way they stay together. So in this paragraph, I think the things that were strong about it is they of course do the basics. They name the poem, right? They give us a little bit about the poem, right? To give it context. They go right into here, symbolism, right? So here they give an example or two examples, and then and they go right into the description of what they mean together. And this just here, sometimes when you're in Google Docs, you'll see that. They'll give you a suggestion for a change. So that one's there. You could take that the out, right? And the description symbolizes confidence and her personality when she walks the street. So I think here there will be just a little bit of a syntax thing that we could fix, but I'm going to leave it alone. Neruda described his emotions when he sees her, and when you appear that all the rivers sound in my body, bell shakes the sky, and a hymn fills the world. He, and then do a little space there, symbolizes the rivers sound in my body, referring to the bristling of the skin, and shake the sky refers to the beat of his heart. What I'm going to bring out about these two pieces here is how directly the student names what the symbol is and what it represents, right? Here, the hymn symbolizes a song that gives peace and love. So it's identifying directly what the symbol is and saying what the symbol means. And so that's one of the things that's important to be clear when you do that, okay? We'll look at two other examples, okay, here. Symbolism is used to represent ideas. This is a different one altogether, right? So you could see you can begin it in lots of different ways, but here this person began with symbolism is used to represent ideas or the qualities, right? In the poem, The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur uses symbolism with the concrete and the rose in his poem. The rose is used to represent a human getting through tough situations, even if it is overwhelming. Anything is possible. Continue to push yourself, and even when life is hard. The concrete represent the hard things in life that tries to hinder you from doing things that you know you can. Tupac says, proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. This is saying that the concrete being the blockade in the life, the rose grew to overcome in the obstacles, right? So again, this one directly identifies the concrete and the rose as the symbols, right? Talks about how what the rose represents literally, right? Getting through tough situations, right? And also talks about what the concrete represents. So again, another direct representation, a direct connection. So I'm gonna make in this one, we could see there's some little issues with grammar and stuff like that. So I'm gonna fix them so you can see what it looks like, right? So here I would say, in the poem, The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur, I would add the word he, uses symbolism. So you see how when I made a correction, it gives you, it looks different. And then there's an explanation of what I did. Over here, let me just see if I can slide it over. Right, so you can see the explanation there, right? With concrete and the rose in his poem. The rose is used to represent a human getting through tough situations, even if it is overwhelming, okay? So here there's a subject verb agreement. It feels like tough situations, right? Even if it, so if the it refers to the situations, right? Then it has to be are, even if they are overwhelming, right? And then you would need a comma. Anything is possible, right? Continue to push yourself even when life is hard, right? So tough situations, even if they are overwhelming, anything is possible. Continue to push yourself even when life is hard. The concrete represent, another subject verb will be represents, the hard things in life that try, again, subject verb, to hinder you from doing things that you know you can do. Tupac says, and then normally when you have a quote, you need a comma right there, proving nature's law is wrong and learn to walk without having feet. Another correction is here. Periods and punctuation usually go inside, and that would be that. Then sometimes here I would say, okay, sometimes I will give you a little explanation of it, right? So that you can try to remember that in the future. And then this is saying that the concrete being the blockade in life, the road being the blockade in life, comma, the rose grew to overcome the obstacles, right? So again, when we read it, it was fine. It was a good paragraph. The student did a good job connecting, doing the assignment, which was to identify the symbols and explain the symbols. Use quotes, right, which was great. That's another thing it was asking you to do, right? Another good thing is they noticed that the poem as well goes into quotation marks, right? But then there were like small things that I was fixing and cleaning up, right? And sometimes I might even do this. Let me see if I have my file open. Let's see. No, I have a, yeah, no. All right, sometimes with subject verb agreement, like sometimes I'll just say that, like here, let me just do this one. Maybe where I put the S here. I might write, And then sometimes if I have a link to a site that talks more about subject-verb agreement, I'll include the link there. And so some of you, when you get your papers, your other papers back in the future, this is the conversation we will have this way, right? That it will, that there'll be your work, and then my comments will appear, my corrections and comments or suggestions. Sometimes I'll just write an actual comment, right? I might just go here and say, insert a comment, right? And so I might say, this is a strong word, but perhaps you can consider using one, I might say something about it as well, and that might be another thing that appears in it, okay? So I'm gonna pause for a minute, and I can see you in the little screen, but if you have any questions, maybe unmute yourself or pop it in the chat before I move on. So any questions about, what the assignment was calling for, which was constructing a paragraph specifically talking about symbolism and identifying and describing it, and part two, this thing I just did with making corrections and all these little comments showing up on the side. Any questions about either of those two things? I'm pausing. Okay, so this is one of that, remember that analogy, not on the platform, make sure you're on the train. I'm just checking to see if any of your students are in the waiting room. Okay. All right, let's look at one more example. Let's make sure we move it to the last line. Okay, in this one. In the poem, The Queen by Pablo Neruda, he uses symbolism. Symbolism is when you use words, images, and things as a representation beyond its meaning, right? The student picked that up from the prompt. In this poem, he's describing a woman he fell in love with. He uses symbolism to express his feelings for her, right? So he's giving us, or she's giving us, they're giving us the context of it. And then they write, Neruda writes, no one sees your crystal crown. The crown signifies the beauty within her that he's referring to. Her beauty on the inside is reflecting on the outside. So Neruda continues to write, the carpet of red gold that you tread as you pass, there isn't actually a carpet that she's walking on. He's referring to her as someone of power. Others may look at her as an ordinary person, but to him, he's not. Neruda also writes, all the rivers sound in my body, bells shake the sky, and him fills the world. He's expressing how he feels when he sees this woman. He's overjoyed, happy, and excited. Pablo Neruda used physical objects that are non-existent to describe his queen, right? So in this one, you can get a sense that they did a similar thing, right? They named the poem, they used a couple, they described what symbolism was, they used a couple of lines to give us a sense of what the poem's about. They moved right into doing the descriptions, right? And this one kind of was nice because it also did like a concluding sentence, right? A sentence that kind of wrapped up what this was about. And that's called a concluding sentence, right? Or a closing sentence. So I'm gonna come back in the class. Here we go. So from time to time, I will slow down and bring examples from our okay. So I will slow down and go through an assignment and give some examples. If any of you feel strongly, say, don't ever use my, as in, I try not to put any names on it, do it like this. Or sometimes if I read it, I don't read who the student's paper was. But sometimes, I can come up with a bunch of examples, but I think it's great to see the work that you're doing in class, and that's what we're here for, here to work together, to improve together. You all walk in the door at one level. My goal at this level is to move you to the next level and the next level in this class. That's the goal. Not everybody's great. If we can make you all A writers, right on. That'll be a beautiful goal. But really the important thing in your educational career is always thinking of how you can move a step forward. Like you walk in with some knowledge, and how do you take what you've learned and keep advancing it? So I want to do that with your writing in this class, and also your reading with your reading. So I will take a moment, remind me about the Microsoft 3, the free Microsoft. Might have questions? Yes, okay. Checking in the chat, all right. So I hope you felt that was helpful. And if you feel otherwise, definitely communicate that with me. If I move too quickly, let me know that too. I'm trying to also pace myself, right? And especially for those of you who faces I don't see, the rest of you who see, I can see you nodding or reacting. So that's helpful. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a Tarzan swing and talk a little bit, do a little bit of instruction. So we've already kind of dived into class, but we're gonna pause for a minute and we're gonna look at the elements of poetry. So I'm gonna go to it, and you can of course you can open it, but I'm gonna open it and put it on the screen so you can read it. But I'm gonna go to it. Oops, let's see. It's telling me. Let's see, I do this. Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna go to Blackboard, but I had it open. Here it is. Yep. And then you go to course content, right? You go to poetry, and this is right now is where our stuff lives, right? Once we're done with poetry, there's going to be another folder that's going to say fiction, but right now, since we're in poetry, it's not there. So poetry, I'm going to go to elements of poetry. I'm going to open it up. Okay, great. So let me. It's bigger. Okay. And I think let me share my screen. I'm going to share my screen with all of you. I thought I was, but I wasn't. Okay. So here's elements of poetry, and this is a handout that's kind of doing an overview of this section of the class. So this introduction, one of the things I say in it, and I think I wasn't clear if I asked you to read it, but I'm going to ask you to definitely read it for Wednesday. Just read it yourself, for Wednesday. But so essentially, one of the things I say is like a painter that uses paint, clay or sculpture to mold a sculpture. Poets use words, right? So they use words to create, right? And a lot of times poems don't necessarily have to be tell a story, right? There's a type of poem that tells a story, but poems really are about, about evoking an emotion, I think sparking a thought, making you think about something, making you feel something, right? So think of poems like that, right? So sometimes very often poems have a theme or meaning, right? An underlying meaning. And also think of poems that as I think sometimes they could be very much examinations of our humanity, how we are as human beings, how we feel, how we cry, how we hurt, how we love, all those kinds of things poems have. So their poems can be divided into there's more than three, but there's three main kinds that we're gonna at least discuss here. One is a narrative poem, and narrative. What does a narrative mean? Does anybody know what a narrative is? You could just write in the chat or yell it out, or mute and yell it.
Is it when somebody is writing their story or telling the story?
Yeah, well, the important word you just said was story, right? A narrative is a story, right? And a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? So there's a sequence to the story. There's something beginning, something happening in the middle, and then it landing someplace, right? So narrative poems are usually poems that will tell a story, right? So it's different than sharing an idea or sharing a moment or describing a scene that poems can do, but this is literally telling a story, okay? So that's one. The other kind is dramatic poetry. Now, dramatic poetry might sound like dramatic, like I'm gonna scream and be all, but it's not that kind of dramatic. Dramatic comes from the word drama. And so usually a dramatic poem is usually a monologue in a play, right? And there's some great, if we will. Like Shakespeare very often has a monologue, many monologues or soliloquies that they call in his plays, right? Romeo and Juliet, right? Has, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Done I thy father refuse thy name, and she's standing on a balcony. And it's a whole soliloquy, a whole monologue she makes to it. in Hamlet, which we will be, it's like to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis noble in the mind, so it goes on. So so those are dramatic ones. There's a play I used to do a lot in our class called The Glass Menagerie, and it has some really beautiful monologues. So toward the end of the poetry section, if we have time, I'll bring it in and share it with you. I'll bring a video of it. It's really wonderful monologue. Or, I'll find ways to bring it in some way in the class. The other kind is a lyric poem, right? And so the lyric poem, I'm going to tell you a heads up, is like the majority of the poems that are in our poetry packet. We're going to be focusing on lyric poems. So this is the type of poem that comes to mind for most people when they think of what a poem is. Lyric poetry doesn't necessarily tell a story, doesn't have a plot, doesn't follow a logical progression. It's more about using elements like rhyme, rhythm to create an overall effect or feeling. So lyric poetry is a type of poetry which expresses personal emotions or feelings, typically spoken in the first person, right? The first person means from the I perspective, like, so it's interesting because Pablo Neruda's The Queen is written in second person, right? It's saying you, right? They're taller than you, they're lovelier than you, but you are my queen, you are this, no one sees you. It's written in second person. But usually it's written in first person, most lyric poems. And the term comes from ancient Greek. So in poems, at the beginning, they weren't written, poems were read, right, or sung, right? And a lyre, people know what a lyre is. Anyway, a lyre is like this little harp. A harp has this big thing with lots of strings and it makes this beautiful sound. But a lyre is a small one. So they would play a small lyre with the music. So so that's how the word lyric poetry came out. So how else do we use the word lyric? Chat or speak?
In music.
Music, right. That was Allan, right? In music, definitely. When we look for the words of a song, we say lyrics, right? So there's this connection between words and music that lyric poetry has. So not all poetry is musical, but lyric poem very often has rhythm, has lots of things, but the root of it is that the poems were sung to a lyre, okay? So prose versus verse. So very often you'll hear the word prose, right? And you'll hear the word verse when we're talking about poems. Prose is what we are most used to, right? It's when you write a paragraph just the way this looks here, right? And the reason why this paragraph ends is because it got to the end of the margin, right? And it continues in the next line. And you say things that you mean that you don't, and automatically take aesthetics into account. You know that this continues in the next line. Here's the end of the period. The logic is really ruled by the punctuation and by the margin, right, in prose. And that is how most prose is shown, right? Verse is poetic composition, right? And so that's the verse, they're not ruled by the same rules that most prose. Like if you read an article in the newspaper, whatever the column width is, that's the size of it. The punctuation follows, what a period is, what a comma means, what a semicolon is, etc. So it's following those rules of grammar, right? Poems sometimes use grammar as rules, but they're doing something different with them. So here, verse, right? There's different things happening with verse, right? Like I said. So let me just go to this here, right? So this is a sample of this poem Edgar Allan Poe's A Dream Within a Dream. And if you notice, it doesn't end at the margin, right? Sometimes here's a exclamation point, there's a comma here, there's a dash here, there's nothing here, right? But then it begins with a capital T over there. That would never happen. If you wrote that in your essay, I would say there's a period missing, right? Or that the T has to be lowercase or something. So in terms of grammar, there's different rules happening, right? Also, there's not only different rules, it's being done with a purpose or on purpose. The other thing is that it doesn't end, right, at the margin. It ends whenever the writer decides it needs to be the end of the line. And sometimes they do that for different reasons, right? And so in this one, let's read a bit of this one, right? Take this kiss upon thy brow. What is called a dream within a dream. Take this kiss upon thy brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away, in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seen is but a dream within a dream. Okay, so forget about the meaning right now because the poem kind of curls around itself. But if you notice, Edgar Allan Poe breaks the line, right, in a way that even he said, take this piss upon thy brow, and in parting to you now, this much let me avow. He could put that all in one line, but he breaks it so that we can see and hear the rhyme scheme that he's starting, right? So you see brow, now, avow, right? There, deem, dream, right? A rhyming, away, day, right? Gone, none and gone, and then seen and dream. So here, the line breaks really correspond to a lot of the rhyming that Edgar Allan Poe is doing in this particular poem, right? Then of course, the punctuation is helping you give a little more understanding. So I'll come back to this poem, but if you look at it, it starts, take this kiss upon thy brow, right? Brow's your forehead, right? And in parting from you now, somebody's leaving, this much let me avow. Avow means to make a statement, right? Or make a pledge, right? So take this kiss upon, I'm gonna kiss you on your forehead, and now I'm parting from you, and this much let me say. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream, right? You're not, so it goes on from there. But at least at the very beginning, I want you to see those three lines. We can start unlocking the poem as we have done with others. Okay, so prose is meant to mimic natural speech, right? This is the difference between, right? Prose does not usually rhyme, right? When we're writing a story, we're not really worried about rhyme. And prose is not really thinking about rhythm, like the metric of the lines used in it. And prose sets into words, into sentences, into paragraphs, while verse sets them in lines that can be sentences and sometimes in stanzas. In other words, verses use line breaks creatively while prose doesn't, okay? So this is what I mean by line breaks by here. Now this one, if we look at this, is just one whole poem without any spaces in it. If there were spaces, then instead of paragraph, they would be called stanzas. And we'll see another example soon. Okay. So I'm going to focus on theme. I'm going to talk about theme and subject, but I'm going to focus on theme. So theme, right, is the poetic theme is the main point the author is trying to make in the poem. Theme is the lesson that readers learn about life after reading a poem. Another way to think of theme is the moral of the poem. Many of the poets have a thematic focus on major life issues such as love, death, or independence. So far in class, we've read two poems together, right? We've read Pablo Neruda's A Queen, and we've read The Rose That Grew from Concrete, right, by Tupac Shakur. What would you think the themes, what is a theme, or what is a theme in The Queen? You know, you can unmute or chat it. What do you think of a theme in The Queen, in The Queen is? Remember, the Queen is the main point of the story, right? It could be a lesson. What do you think the Queen?
The woman.
Say it again.
The woman.
You're talking about
the person that he's talking about.
Uh-huh. I didn't hear what you said though. You typing it? Okay. Let's see. Love, the woman. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the woman in a minute, right? So love, right? Because love is one of the ideas, right? Another theme in the poem could be longing. Like he wants this person, right? Right? That there's this longing inside of that, right? The woman, right, would be more the subject, right? The what he is talking about. So one way to think about theme and subject Theme is more like the how come, like the why, right? Why, what's going on in the story, right? And then the subject is the what, right? And sometimes those can get mixed up in our heads because subject and theme sound like the same thing, and but and that was a good example. Who was that, Adrian? Yes, the woman is the subject. That's like what he is writing. That's what he is talking about. Finding a will to keep going. For Tupac's poem, for sure, right? That is a theme inside of The Rose That Grew from Concrete, right? So that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about themes, like what is this poem about? What is this poem saying to you, right? And a lot of times we spend lots of time thinking about what is the theme or the meaning of the poem, right? So we're going to focus on theme, not so much on subject. We can work, if any of you, are excited about subject, you could do that. I give an example here of this poem by Birches by Robert Frost. Robert Frost, by the way, let me stop for a minute. So Edgar Allan Poe, who was the poem about a dream within a dream, that Edgar Allan Poe is considered a Gothic writer. And if any of you ever go to Kingsbridge, to the park in Kingsbridge, there's a little cottage there, and that's Edgar Allan Poe's cottage. And that's technically his last residence that he lived there. He lived there with his wife. It wasn't there. They moved it to that spot. It was, I think, across the street, closer to Fordham Road. But they moved the house there into that park. But it was the last place he lived with his wife, Virginia, and she died in that house. And if any of you go, you can go there. But a very famous writer used to live in the Bronx in that house, and so that's his poem. He has many other things, short stories, etc., that are really great. But he tends to be more Gothic, more of a Gothic writer. Robert Frost is a very famous poet as well, and he writes about nature. So this poem that's in here is called Birches, and birches are trees. You know those kind of skinny trees that have a whitish looking trunk? That's what a birch is. And so he writes here about birch. And so I put it there as an example, moving a little quickly, but you'll read the handout. But I'm putting it there as an example so you can kind of see what almost Adrian brought about. Like birches, in the theme, he's talking about nature, he's talking about renewal, he's talking about, those are the themes, but the subject are the trees, right? That's what the subject is, these birch trees, So that's theme and subject. So one of the things that poems also often have, and I'll continue this going through the handout in class on Wednesday. So they use sound effects inside of the theme, right? Inside of poems. So sound effects, rhyme is a sound effect, right? That's one of the most common sound effects. And so here we have another Robert Frost poem, but it's shorter. And now so I'm reading some poems today as part of the exercise. So so rhyming are when there's two kinds of rhyme, right? It's similar to two kinds. One is a direct rhyme, right? Where here, if we look at these words, gold and hold, right? That those are words that sound alike. The ending of the words sound alike. Sometimes the sound is not exact, but it's close, right? So when the sound is not exact but close, they just call it a slant rhyme, right? But it's still a rhyme, just a slant rhyme. In the Edgar Allan Poe one, there's an example of a slant rhyme, right? Here, where it's brow, now, and a vowel all seem, they sound alike. Deem and dream, okay. Away and day, and then here's the slant line, none, gone, right? It's not non and it's not gone, right? But it's none and gone. And even though they're not exactly alike, they're close, right? The sound is close. So they call that a slant rhyme, okay? So, so we know that there's direct rhymes and there's slant rhymes. So, so I'm gonna stick with the rhyme for now. So let's just read this one because it's short, right? It's nothing gold can stay. Now remember, Robert Frost very much writes about nature, right? That's what he's always writing about. He has a house, I think in Vermont, that was that he lived for, and it was in the middle of the woods. And now, I mean, he died, right, in 1963. He died like what, almost 60 years ago, 50 something years ago. So the house that he used to live in now is a writer residency, and so you can apply and stay up there for a month and do writing in his house. So if any of you are aspire to write creatively, talk to me. But that's a program that exists, and there's many programs like that exist. But Robert Frost, Nothing Gold Can Stay. So part of it is we're going to look at rhyming, and we're going to look at the meaning of it. So I'm going to do like we did with all the other poems. I'm going to read it once, I'm going to read it a second time, and then we'll go through it slowly. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early life's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. Right? Read it again. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Sorry. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. Okay. Does anybody want to say anything? You know, do they understand anything? Any meaning? Chat it, unmic it, unmute. Okay. The pregnant pause.
Nothing is eternal.
Nothing is eternal. Yeah. If you were, that is certainly a theme of this poem. You know, just from that quick two time reading, that is certainly a theme inside of that. Do you want to? Was that Allan?
Yes.
What makes you say that? Is there something that said that, or is that just a sense you got from what was read?
It's in the final line that kind of gave me that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing gold can stay, right? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Let's just go through it slow, right? So first of all, we see the rhyming: gold, hold, flower, hour, leaf, grief, day, stay. So he's doing the line breaks according to how the rhyme scheme is happening in the poem. And when I say rhyme scheme, I'm going to speak more about what a rhyme scheme is. Maybe not today. I'm gauging. When I look to my left here, there's a clock I could see. So I'm trying to keep, even though I have a little clock on my computer, I'm just trying to gauge what we're doing today. And I want to, there's something I want to explain the next assignment. So, so nature's first green is gold. What do you think that means? Like, nature's first green is gold. That first line is like, what? When I first read it, I scratched my head, right? So what do you think nature's first green is gold? What do you think that could mean? Any thoughts? Lindsay, yes, you're very close, right? Spring, beginning, new opportunities. Yes, Sodalis, right? Gold, beginning, right? So when you think of spring, those of us who live in New York City, we have, remember this, Robert Frost is looking out at nature a lot and he's being inspired, right? When spring becomes in New York City in a couple of weeks, right? There's one almost literal example to think about the ideas you're talking about. Nature is so valuable like that. Yes. Yeah. So, you know those green bushes, right? That are all over the Bronx and all over New York City. When they wake up, if you recall, what is their first color? Right? They're yellow, they're gold, right? Very often trees, when they awaken, sometimes they begin with a blossom with a color, right? So eventually they turn green, right? So nature's one literal way to think of it is nature's first green is gold. So before they're green, they're gold, right? Her hardest hue to hold. It's hard to stay that color because, part of evolution, part of life, the flower falls off the tree, right? And then the green comes, right? It says her early leaves a flower, right? So instead of there's a leaf, there's a flower there, right? But only so an hour, right? So the flower is there only an hour. An hour is only one tiny part of a big day, right? A whole day is 24 hours. But if you're only there for the first hour, that is. So the first four lines, nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour, right? So it's just that simple idea of when the blossom comes, it's this thing, and then it falls away and becomes a leaf, right? Then it says, then leaf, right? After the flower grows, it's a leaf. Leaf subsides to leaf. So that leaf falls off and then another leaf will eventually grow, right? The leaf subsides or gives way to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. What do you think that line right there? What is Eden? We don't know what Eden is, the Garden of Eden.
Sacred fruits.
Say it again.
Sacred fruits.
Well, there were sacred fruits in the Garden of Eden, right? That's the whole origin of sin, right? Was the Garden of Eden according to the Bible. But Eden was paradise, right? That was where everything was perfect, right? According to, again, the Bible. So it says Eden sank to grief. So Eden became sad, right? Because this cycle, right? Paradise, perfection becomes sad because, there is this sense of birth and death, right? Beginning and ending, right? Nothing being eternal, things beginning and things end. So Eden sank to grief. And then it says, so dawn goes down to day. What is dawn? Dawn is the morning, the sunrise. But at the end, it also goes away, right? So Eden sank to grief, like paradise perfection feels the heaviness, the grief of change. Dawn, right, goes down to day, right? Dawn becomes and continues. It doesn't stay dawn the whole day, right? And then it says nothing gold can stay, right? And so I think it was Allan as well who said that there was something in that last line that talked about something not being eternal. So now if we go all the way back to the beginning of the poem, right, we start to hear that, right? And it's like being very slow, right? Reading how the lines connect to each other, making sure that we know vocabulary, right? So nature's first green is gold. Her hardest hue is color. It's another word for color. Her hardest hue to hold, right? Her early leaves a flower, like we were talking about that, but only so an hour because the flower blooms and then falls off, and then there's the leaf. The leaf subsides to leaf. So even the leaf doesn't last forever. The leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief, right? So even, and they say Eden gets sad, but even Eden wasn't eternal, right? Eden, we know the Garden of Eden was supposed to be perfection, and then, Adam and Eve both sinned and then were banished out of Eden. And so by eating the forbidden fruit. And then so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay, right? Nothing gold. Gold also could represent perfection, could be valuable, could be, so many things, but even all those things don't stay, right? So we had to define what Eden was. We talked about subside was, right? Dawn, to make sure we know what dawn was, and then nothing gold can stay, okay? So like this poem, like the other two poems that we talked about, sometimes with this one too, right? Because I think at first, Allan got it, probably a couple of other of you got it, right? Nature, about spring, there was something about all of you were getting a sense of it. But then when we slow down and read it section by section, hopefully it starts to unlock and we get to see more of the theme, right? So that theme is clearly there, right? Like nothing lasts forever, nothing is eternal, there is a cycle of life and death. All these themes are inside of this tiny poem, right? And then the subject could be nature, right? Literally, the nature could be the subject. So there are sound effects that also, besides rhyming, we're just talking about rhyming, there's sound effects in it, and one is alliteration. An alliteration is when the first syllable, right, of a word, that when they repeat the first syllable to create a sound. Like here, the big brown bear bit into a blueberry. So there's all this B sound, like buh, 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 right? So it's this repetition of a letter. Here's another one is the mummies, and usually the mummy's mummy was no common dummy, right? So there's a lot of sense of M's inside of that. It can be like a lot like that, or it can just be just a tiny little bit, right? And he even does it in his poem right here. He goes, hear this line, her hardest hue to hold. So in a way, he's playing with alliteration with the letter H. Okay, 1 second, everyone. Somebody is knocking. This is craziness at my door. 1 second. Just giving me an update, giving us all an update of the heat situation in the building. But I just got an idea. I'm going to put a do not disturb sign on my door when I'm teaching. That's because this is the second time this has happened. He comes and knocks, but okay. So we're talking about alliteration. So yeah, so it's the repeating of a particular, like you've probably heard like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. So Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Where's the peck of pickled peppers that Peter Piper picked? Right? That's an example of alliteration. There's another one that a friend of mine in theater used to say, and it's in Spanish. It's like, pancha, plancha con cuatro planchas, con cuánto planchas, plancha, pancha, something like that. Right? But that's again working with alliteration of the letter P, and it's a theater exercise, right? So so that's alliteration. So that's a sound. So there's rhyming, there's alliteration, right? There is this idea of consonants. I put here that's repeating when the words M, but not only at the beginning, but inside of the, lots of M's throughout it. That's gonna be consonants. A consonant is all the letters that are not A, E, I, O, U, not the vowels, right? So that's what that is talking about consonants. All right. There's assonance is when a vowel is repeated, right? So the vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, right? But a vowel is repeated. So here's an example. I might like to fight like 9 parrots at a time, right? So in it, I, almost every word has a sound of I in it, right? So I'm just sharing these things because sometimes poets are working on a lot of levels. So not only working in theme, they're sometimes working with assonance, they're working with consonants, they're working with alliteration, they're working with rhyming, they're always doing so much in a tiny little space. We can go back to this poem and keep finding more things that Robert Frost is doing inside of that poem, right? Another thing is onomatopoeia, right? You may have heard that word before. And so that word, basically, it is saying that it is, excuse me, that it's when sometimes they use sounds in the poem that sound like the actual thing, right? The easiest example is a bee, right? Or a fly, right? When they say a bee does buzz or fly says buzz, like they don't literally say buzz, but it sounds like it. It sounds like a buzz sound when a fly is flying around you. The word meow is like a cat sound, right? That's a, and words like pow sounds like a punch, you know, it's not exactly the way a sound is. So when a sound is, so when the word is supposed to mimic the sound of something, is considered onomatopoeia. So there's, I'm sharing all this because there's like words, right? There's meanings and definitions to all of the things that are happening inside of the poems. There's also euphony and cacophony. And so that is when, euphony is when things are harmonious, and usually letters that are used to sound smooth. And cacophony is usually like chaos. So cacophony sometimes is harder letters. And so the euphony, the smoother letters, right, are usually vowels, right, are those, and also the letters like L and M, etc. And cacophony are harder, like K's and K's and C's, and hard letters give you that sense of hardness in it. There's an example there. I'm trying to think. All right, so just structural things are like stanzas, I call them, and that's like instead of paragraphs, they're called stanzas. And enjambment, and so enjambment is like what we're talking about, right? This idea of where the line breaks happen, right? Or where the periods of punctuation happen, right? So, so here's a small little line to give it. Sometimes poets put a whole sentence on one line, right? That is fine. Sometimes they choose to break a sentence in the middle. Either way is fine. So they break the sentence and then it continues in the middle, period. Either way is fine, right? So this on its own seems a little strange. In the middle, period, either way is fine. That's not a complete sentence. But this sentence is continuing from the previous line. But sometimes they choose to break a sentence. This makes sense on its own, right? Adding in the middle gives it more context. So there's a reason and a method why they're doing this, but just be aware that enjambment, this cutting of the line, breaking of the line, moving the punctuation around, is being done on purpose. And then yeah, so let's do rhyme scheme for a minute. We'll do rhyme scheme today, and then let's see what we have. Meter, we're not gonna do meter. Literary effects. Yeah, then we can talk more about the rest of the stuff next week on Wednesday. Let's talk about rhyme scheme. Do I want to talk about rhyme scheme? Yes, okay. So let's go back. So very often when you're looking at a rhyme scheme, and I'm going to copy this poem here, right? Very often when you're looking at a rhyme scheme, let me open up a new. Let me go here. Okay, so I'm going to write down nothing gold can stay. I copied it. I'm going to paste it. Oops, let me do it with the formatting. Okay, good. All right, I'm going to double space it. And make it bigger. Okay. Move us up there. So to be able to talk about a rhyme scheme means like the order of how the rhyme is working, how words may be organized, how the rhyme is organized. So what they use the letters A, B, C, D. So when you begin looking at a rhyme scheme, right, let me do this. right? So you start with the letter A. So the first sign is gold. I'm going to put the letter A, right? Go to the next one, right? The second one is hold. So it's the same as the letter A, right? Same sound. Gold and hold are A sound, A, right? Now they sound like the letter A, but the letter A is representing. Now the rhyme scheme changes, right? Because gold, hold, flower doesn't rhyme with hold or gold. So that's a different sound that gets introduced. And then that'll be B, right? And then hour rhymes with flower. So that would be a B, right? Then leaf subsides to leaf, right? So that's a different sound from gold and flowers. That would be the letter C. And then Eden sank to grief. Grief and leaf rhymes. That would be C. And then day is a different sound and it doesn't rhyme with hold, flower, hour, or leaf, right? So that's another sound, D. And then this would be D as well because day and stay rhyme together. So this has an AA, BB, CC, DD rhyme scheme, right? That is the rhyme scheme that this particular poem has. We heard before life is a dream, the dream within a dream, right? A dream within a dream. Let's just be able to do that. This one is also a rhyme scheme, right? Has a rhyme scheme. So let's look at how we do the rhyme scheme in this. Oops. Yeah, okay, good. All right, so I'm gonna make a space and then I'm gonna start it. No. It's gonna make me crazy, but I'll get it right. Copy. Okay, good. Okay, so let's start this one. This would be the first sound is A, right? And then brow, now would be A, right? And then a vowel continues. It rhymes with those, right? That would be A. And then deem, that's a different sound. That would be B, right? And then this is a different sound, and that would be B, right? Deem and dream. Okay, so away, let me just move this to another. So it could be on its own. So then away, what would that be? You can yell it or type it.
C.
Will it be C?
It would be C, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a different sound. Brow, a vowel, all these sound the same. Deem, dream, right? But away is a different sound, so it would be C, yeah. And then day would continue it, right? What about none?
D.
E.
D, right? It would be a D sound, and then gone
D.
would also be D because it's connected to none. And then what about seam?
B?
E.
B.
Oh, wait, no.
E. It will be E.
No, because it says theme and deem and dream.
Yeah, so it's B.
Yeah.
It's B.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you see. I let you work it out. So you see that sometimes it can repeat back. So this is just a different pattern. So sometimes, sometimes there's different reasons for the rhyme scheme. Sometimes a rhyme scheme is specific because it's a closed form, and we'll learn about closed forms on Wednesday, right? That's it. Okay, we're gonna stop with rhyme schemes because I want to go to, I want to quickly talk about, let me see, no, now the words, yes, okay, yes, AB, good, all right, let me just check. All right. Okay, you're forming a WhatsApp group, good, okay, cool. I think it would be cool, yes, yes, yes. Okay, for sure, all right. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to Blackboard, right? Go back to discussions is where we put our assignments. right? And so this is the symbolism assignment. So, you know, the paragraph is there. I'm going to talk about this assignment. I'm going to talk about it more again on Wednesday. The next assignment that's on here, it's already listed. The next couple assignments are listed. So your next assignment will be on the 16th. So on Wednesday, I'm going to move this to the top, right? So for right now, it's the second in line. So your next assignment are going to be, it's going to be to identify, to pick a poem. You're going to look in the poetry packet. I didn't get to the poetry, read a poem from the poetry packet today, but we'll do that on Wednesday. So we'll read a couple of poems. So, so you're going to look in the packet. You know, you could pick a poem that we've talked about, but really the packet is there because there's all these amazing poets in there. There's a woman named Maya Angelou. I don't know if any of you know Maya Angelou, but definitely look up her poem. She's one of great American poems. There's so many great poets that are in there. Maya Angelou's in there. Emily Dickinson is in there. There's contemporary poets like La Bruja and just drawing a blank, Sandra Maria Esteves from the Nuyorican Poets, one of the Nuyorican Poets movement. So there's lots of different kinds of poets in there. This is the first woman published poet. Phyllis Wheatley is the first African-American woman who was ever published. There's poems by her in there. There's an amazing Senegalese poet whose work is in there as well. Leopold, and I'm drawing a blank on his last name. Natasha Trethewey, you know, great poets by amazing women like Sylvia Plath. Anyway, I'm saying all these names. We'll get to know some of these people. But the idea is like kind of like, you know, flip through it, scroll through it, read some of the lines of the poem. Maybe there's a name you're interested in. Maybe there's a title that attracts you. You're going to pick a poem from the poetry packet. And then once you've picked the poem that you like, your assignment is going to be to identify the theme and discuss the theme, and then discuss at least one other poetic element, right? So the elements that we've been talking about, so we spent a lot of time talking about sound today. So like rhyming, cacophony, alliteration. Well, we talked about symbolism, right? Later on, we're going to talk about metaphor. We're going to talk about simile. So these are the poetic elements. These are the elements that are inside of a poem. So your assignment's going to be to pick a poem, to identify the theme, right? And then identify a poetic element, like one of the elements that the poet is using, right? Symbolism, we'll talk about imagery. We'll talk about a lot more things on Wednesday. But we've talked about some today. We'll talk about some more on Wednesday. Then we'll read a couple of poems and, you know, maybe at least 2 more poems in class, and we will be able to identify them. So right now we've read Tupac Shakur poem. We've read a poem by Pablo Neruda. Today we read and broke down a poem by Robert Frost. So we'll keep building on our repertory of poems that we do together. But the idea is that you should be able to begin doing this on your own, right? Once we talk about theme, you're thinking about theme. Once we talk about what these elements are, you'll be on the lookout for these elements. So your next assignment is going to be closer to a paper, but not yet a full paper. So in here are the instructions on it, on how to do it. There is a whole packet that I'm not going to open. I'll open up on Wednesday. But if any of you are curious, you can open the packet, and we're going to go through the packet on Wednesday. So, and this assignment is going to be due next week on Tuesday night, only because we don't have class next week Monday because it's President's Day or something. So we're off on Monday. So instead of having it due Sunday or Monday when you're supposed to be off and doing something patriotic or presidential, it'll be due on Tuesday. So I extended that one a little bit. But that's this one here. I think it's Tuesday the 16th, okay? So that's what I have. I will pause. If people have questions, I'll stay on for a little bit. And I saw that folks are connecting about a WhatsApp. So look at the number and stuff that's in there. Please feel free to do that. Another thing I'll offer to you all, if sometimes we want to do a collective office hour and several of you want to come together to one of my office hours and we can work on things at an office hour, that's also available. We can arrange that. And as long as there aren't a lot of other students who want to have office hours then, or we can set up a special office hour if a group of you want to go over anything we could do that as well. Okay. So any questions in the chat or by voice? If not, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see each other on Wednesday. And hopefully I will have,
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
okay. All right.
Bye.
And yes, Catherine, we don't, on next week, Monday, the 15th, we don't have class.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
All right. Take care. That's great. And in case people are wondering, I can take attendance because the class is recorded, and I could, and I do that right after class to make sure that everybody's here. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, I'm gonna do something the next class as you all leave, just to make sure that we're clear on the attendance. Okay. All right. Welcome to everybody. Yeah. Yes, Liliana, you do.
Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna get to that now.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. All right. Have a great day. Enjoy.
All right, Dana, I'm gonna close the class.